Good day, mates. I'm really pleased to see earlier this morning that Sam Harris changed the topic of his talk from his title, because I've done the same thing. I'm sorry, that title you saw briefly up there has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about. You see, I was working on this talk a couple weeks ago, and something remarkable happened. It evolved. Who knew? And you know, it's because, I have to say this, I am a complex individual. I am capable of a range of different ideas. Some days my militancy knob is turned to 10, and other days 11. So I just felt like doing something different. So what I'm actually going to talk about today is my grand plans for an assault on heaven and the killing of God. And if I had to give it a new title, I would say the title of this one is Sacking the City of God. That's our dream, that's our plan. So a little background first. You may have heard this very common phrase, in the beginning was the Word. But you know what? That's wrong. That's not true. In the beginning of human society, there was the blood. The marker of our identity was the family, the tribe, the clan. What united us into functioning social units was our pedigree, that web of familial ties that knit us together. Unfortunately, that union was limited to a fairly small group of people and could only be expanded by the commitment of marriage and birth, and that limited us. We needed a new way to join together. So next was the word, right? No, not next. Next was the king. The king was a proxy for the blood. You declared allegiance to the big man, the chief, the royal family. Maybe you weren't directly linked by familial relationship, but the king or pharaoh represented you. He was the symbol of your identity, and the size of the social unit could grow. So now do we come to the word? Not quite yet. Next was the city. In the ancient world, the large social unit was the city. Babylon, Athens, Rome. Kings come and go, but Rome was eternal. People didn't say they were Greek. There was an awareness of a similarity of language and history, but when you asked who they were, they thumped their chest and they'd say, I am an Athenian, or I am a Spartan. And Rome built this whole empire with an arrogance of pride in that special Roman citizenship. So it was even an identity that could be expanded to a remarkable degree. People standing on Hadrian's Wall in farthest Britain or on the frontiers of Syria would find honor in calling themselves Roman. So now we come to the word. There's a problem with basing your identity on a city. Cities fall. When Alaric the Goth sacked Rome in AD 410, St. Augustine could sit back in the relative safety of his home in North Africa and note the event with both horror and triumph. The fall of Rome was an immense cataclysm that shook the ancient world, shattering that sense of identity and constancy, but was also an opportunity for an alternative way of thinking about ourselves to come to ascendancy. And that was the way of the word, or the people of the book. Now, Augustine didn't think of this. It had been tried for a long time. The most notable people of the book are, of course, the Jews. They attached their sense of identity to a collection of laws and stories and commentaries and books, part of which is the Christian Old Testament. They acquired a persistence that cities could not have. When Jerusalem fell, the Jewish people were not destroyed. The event became a chapter in their books, a remembered part of their history. It strengthened their identity. A Roman could not be landless, cityless, or countryless, but a Jew could. You could take everything away from the Jewish people. You could make them homeless and scattered, and still they knew who they were. The most brilliant thing Christianity ever did was to take that idea of the word, that concept of identity wrapped up in an abstract set of ideas and stories, and to open it up to everyone. Rome fell? Oh, you're all alone? Too bad. Here, we can help you find yourself. We can give a new meaning to your life. We have a standard that you can hold high and find unity with a greater people. And that was called the Bible. And I repeat, that was absolutely brilliant. It made Christianity bulletproof. You see, cities can fall, and kings can die, and bloodlines can fade, but ideas can go on and on and on. Now, a 21st century person can feel continuity with a 5th century priest. An American can share a central element of their self with someone in South Africa, with someone in China, with someone in Australia. Heck, with someone on the space station or walking on the moon. We have the concept of an ecumene, people tied together by a common belief that crosses borders. And that's a powerful tool. It's widely used as well. What is a United States citizen but someone bound by a set of documents, the Constitution? There's also power that comes from an unkillable idea. You'll find a version of this in V for Vendetta, Alan Moore's graphic novel or the movie, whichever one you've seen. And that's precisely what the whole story is about. So here's a quote from Evie in the book. She says, "We are told to remember the idea, not the man, because a man can fail. He can be caught, he can be killed and forgotten. But 400 years later, an idea can still change the world." I've witnessed firsthand the power of ideas. I've seen people kill in the name of them and die defending them. But you cannot kill an idea, cannot touch it or hold it. Ideas do not bleed, it cannot feel pain, and it does not love. Now, a moment ago, you're probably dubious and wondering what the heck was wrong with me because I was saying the Bible was powerful and important. But maybe now that I've cited nerd god Alan Moore, you're a little bit more willing to believe what I'm saying. You can kill a man, you can sack a city, but Alan Moore says you can't kill an idea. And ideas can change the world. Ideas can change the world, and that's something we want to do. Now, this is something atheists share in common with Christians. You'll get no argument from the believers in any religion that ideas can change the world. It's what they've been doing for thousands of years, usually for the worse. But I have to disagree with Alan Moore on one thing. You can kill an idea. This is also something that people of faith are fully aware of, perhaps in some cases unconsciously, perhaps not in an intellectual sense, but they know, and they are afraid. History is littered with dead ideas. Christians struggled hard to kill some of them, and succeeded in some cases, failed in others. They know it's hard, but they also know from experience that it can be done. Read the pronouncements of popes and archbishops, read the newspapers and web columns, look to the priests in their pulpits, and you'll see something utterly wonderful. They are reacting to the rise of the new atheists in the same way the Roman establishment reacted to the Visigoths appearing on the horizon. I can't blame them for being fearful. We are galloping towards the central ideas of their identity, and we aim to tear down their walls and replace their obsolete myths with something more vital, with change. And deep in their heart of hearts, they fear that a sequel to St. Augustine's City of God is in the works, and it's going to be written by a goddamned atheist. And that book is going to speak of a brand new world and new opportunities. It will create a new ecumene of people united under something other than the folly of faith. So how do you kill an idea? How will we sack the city of faith? And the answer is fairly simple. Come up with a better and more powerful idea. That's the only way we can win. Now, I am not so arrogant that I'd come in front of you all to tell you that I personally have come up with the grand idea that will be a religion killer. This isn't the kind of thing that pops into existence out of a single mind. It takes refinement over time, lots of smart people hammering on it, just like those holy books weren't magicked into existence in an instant. Fortunately, our idea has been incubating for a few centuries and has involved the greatest minds of our civilization. And that idea is called science. Science is our weapon. It's our God killer. It's the greatest tool humanity has ever invented. It's taken us from a hodgepodge of bickering near savages living in the mud and dying young of disease and childbirth and starvation and sword pokes into a hodgepodge of bickering near savages who sometimes walk on the moon, who sometimes cure diseases, who live twice as long as our predecessors, who can look deep into cells and far out to distant galaxies. It has given us great power to accomplish marvelous things or to screw up the whole planet. Science also has the power to transform our sense of identity. Some of us, many of us in this audience, are no longer people of the world, of the word, excuse me. We are no longer members of a special tribe bound together by the narratives and rules in quaint old books. We are instead the people of reality. We are united by common knowledge, by a sense of universality, and by our commitment to evidence. Personally, I find no sense of myself in the Judeo-Christian fairy tales I was brought up with. They are too narrow, too bigoted, and most importantly, too false. The words of my people, of our people, are written in the strands of DNA I find in every cell of my body. And the story they tell is clear and inspiring. We are all products of the natural world. Stars died to create the elements we are made of, and 4 billion years of churning life struggled and was born and died to shape us. We are close kin to every single human being on the planet without exception. There is no tribe that is outside our family. And even deeper, we are related to every living thing on Earth. You simply cannot get any more universal than the scientific story of life. And I take far greater pride in the accomplishments of science than I do of my ethnic group, or my place in Western culture, or my particular ruling form of government, or least of all, the church I was brought up in. Science bridges differences. I can find common ground with American scientists, Canadian scientists, Mexican scientists, Chinese scientists, Iranian scientists, even Australian scientists. And maybe you aren't a scientist, strictly speaking, but you've read the latest book by Dawkins or Hawking, or you love David Attenborough's TV shows, or you're a bird watcher, or you like weekend hiking in the mountains. You are all my people. We're one. We're united in the appreciation of the natural world. Now, there's another reason I can take pride in science. Science has real power. Science actually works. But let me just take a moment to give you a very short, simple, operational definition of what science is. Science is the process that does its damnedest to figure out how stuff actually works, rather than how we wish it worked. You know, I kind of wish peach pits actually cured cancer. But I think it's more important to do the experiments and measure the results and see if they actually do. Because if they don't, I think it would be a good idea for people to move on to more effective treatments. You know, when I'm shopping for a used car, I kind of wish that really shiny sports car that I look so good in, and that the seller is dumping for cheap, also had a smoothly functioning engine and a sound transmission. So what I will do is I will test it. I will take it for a test ride, or I'll bring it to a mechanic for inspection. That's what rational people do. And you know, my ancestors probably wish the shaman's magic talisman really did keep tigers away, but he probably trusted more in a fire and palisades and a spear close to hand. The ones who didn't aren't my ancestors. The real power of science comes beyond that immediate effect, though. It turns out that if you're disciplined and careful, if you reject ideas based on superstition, revelation, and tradition, and actually require confirmable evidence for any suppositions about even the most mundane things, you find yourself on good, stable ground and are able to ask even deeper questions and get answers. And before you know it, you find yourself in possession of a strong chain of evidence that leads you to answers about the fundamental nature of the universe. And that's real power. Now, when theologians argue, they try to resolve differences by turning to murky sources remote from anything fundamental. They open their holy texts, they cite fellow theologians, they try to reinterpret words that have been reinterpreted many times before. But have you ever heard scientists argue? They do it all the time, but they don't resolve issues by appealing to higher authorities. They don't usually argue that because Richard Dawkins said it, that settles it. They don't argue that we need to parse Charles Darwin's words ever finer in order to finally arrive at the truth. No, they say instead, I'm going to go into the lab and do an experiment to test that proposition. Or they say, I'm going to build a new instrument to measure that and see who's right. Our only authority is reality, and that's what we test all of our inferences against. When you are studying the world, your source of information is the world. Now, I'll have more respect for theologians whose object of study is God when they actually start querying their subject directly. Okay, I'll be generous. I'll say they can start small. They can start with ghosts and angels, and they can work their way up to the big man in the sky. But you know, it's just absurd that people who make so many assertions about the supernatural never seem to actually study supernatural sources of information. It's almost as if they don't exist. Now, I'm sniping a bit at religion, and there's a reason for that. Science and religion are in opposition. Faith is the atheist's enemy. Remember, science is the process for figuring out how the world actually works. If you short-circuit the process and declare that you already have the answer, you just have to believe, then you're an enemy of science. If you simply assert your desired conclusion and ignore the fact that reality is rarely about the answer you want, you're an enemy of science. Truth is often uncomfortable. You have to value it because it is true, not because it makes you feel good. Now, the clearest examples of the dangers of religious thinking can be found in issues of science policy, stuff that matters to us, that affects our lives. Questions about the environment, for instance, ought to be resolved by careful examination of the evidence and by weighing the costs and benefits of proposed solutions, right? That's what you and I would do. That's how reasonable people operate. Not George Pell, as you Australians know. He lives in a state of denial. Not James Inhofe, not John Shimkus. You may not know these people, but these are our American representatives who have influence on energy and environmental policy and who endorse the green dragon philosophy and actively deny the evidence of the world around us. Now, what is this green dragon, you might ask? Here's a statement from one of its proponents. The green dragon is environmentalism. So here's what he has to say about it. Around the world, environmentalism has become an unbalanced, radical movement, something we call the green dragon, and it is deadly. Deadly to human prosperity, deadly to human life, deadly to human freedom, and here's the important part, this is the key issue, deadly to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Make no mistake about it, environmentalism is no longer your friend, it is your enemy, and the battle is not primarily political or material, it is spiritual. I don't know how that works. How do you wage a spirit? Well, anyway. As Christians, we must actively trust God and obey His word. So when it comes to environmental stewardship, we must reject the false worldview, the faulty science, and the counterfeit gospel that threatens to corrupt science, society, and the church. So here are these people. They are addressing problems of the world, and their first instinct is to deny the evidence of this world to favor mysticism and dogma. Both Inhofe and Shimkus have come out with really clear statements, unbelievably clear statements. They say outright, we do not have to worry about climate change, about global warming, about increasing levels of carbon dioxide. Why? because in the Bible, God said we don't have to worry about floods anymore. He promised it wouldn't happen. And that's good enough for them. And besides, and this is the kicker, God is also going to end the world soon, so it's out of our hands. Yes, did you know this? It is the end times. Would you believe that according to a recent Pew survey, 40% of Americans believe that Jesus is finally going to get around to fulfilling that promise he made 2,000 years ago of global death and judgment, and it's going to happen in our lifetimes. Aren't we lucky? And here's the really creepy thing. These affirmative respondents, they all think that, yes, we are lucky. Hooray for Armageddon and the apocalypse. Bring on famine, war, plague, and death. The demented ghouls of the end times are actually a significant political lobby in the United States. They're fighting to support Israel, no matter what. And it's not because people deserve autonomy and independence. It's because they have a prophecy in the book of Revelation that the Jewish state must be restored. And why must it be restored? In order that it be destroyed in a nuclear holocaust. That's got to be reassuring to all the Israeli people. After that nuclear holocaust, all the surviving Jews will quickly convert to Christianity, and then Jesus will come. You don't believe me? Go read the Left Behind books. They lay it all out in detail. That's exactly what's going to happen, they say, so that must be true. And it's weird. If a scientist saw a cataclysm coming, say we saw a meteor on collision course with the Earth in 2050, we would not be all sitting around saying, hallelujah, physics is true, bring it on. My faith in mathematics is restored. We'd be trying to stop it, right? That's the rational approach. And that makes the Christian reaction puzzling. You know, if I actually believed that Jesus was coming to end the world in 2050, I'd be preparing by stocking up on timber and nails. Now, some of you might be saying, okay, you're picking on the extremists. This isn't fair. That maybe you are a liberal Christian. I don't know what you're doing here if you're a liberal Christian. Don't raise your hand, you'll be in big trouble. Maybe you're a liberal Christian, you'll say, I'm picking on the extremists. Although I gotta say, when we're talking about roughly half the United States being evolution-denying, drill baby drill, apocalypse-loving Christians, it's more accurate to say I'm describing a representative sample. But perhaps you are a moderate. You support good science. You support good education. And you support treating the environment appropriately. It's just that you love Jesus or Muhammad too. I've got some bad news for you. I don't like you. I'm sorry. I just don't. We can argue. Now, I will concede that you are doing much less direct harm, and I will thank you for your support of shared causes. And I'll also happily work alongside you in those causes. But I also think you are still doing indirect harm to foundational principles of a rational society. You believe in some outrageous bullshit. The Christian myths of a virgin giving birth to a God who dies are illogical lunacy. And the Christian doctrines of original sin and redemption through blood sacrifice by proxy are crippling psychopathological abominations. And I would say if you are a moderate Christian and you are willing to repudiate those odious doctrines, that's fine. It just means you're not a Christian anymore. You ought to grow up and face that fact. You see, moderate Christians are also promoting unreason by telling people that it is okay to believe in some things without evidence, and even in contradiction to all evidence and reason. They are cafeteria realists. And they undermine the essential goal of bringing the whole of humanity out of the darkness of ignorance and into the light of the real world. Now, I tell such people that the universe is clearly lacking gods and supernatural forces, so just grow up and set all that nonsense aside. Join us. I wish I sounded like James Earl Jones. Join us. Come over to our side. Become a good atheist. You'll be much happier and will waste less time in pointless, just pretend foolishness. So what does it mean to be a good atheist in the 21st century? How do you live as a good atheist? And what should our values be? Now, this is a problem because, as you know, we are a diverse group and we never agree on everything. So I'm going to give you a few ideas that I'm not dictating to you. I'm not telling you this is the way you are. These are things that I'm seeing emerging from our community now as values of great importance. And the three values I want to promote are truth, autonomy, and community. So let's start with truth, because that's the easy one. This one is so fundamental that it's hard to say much about it. If you aren't dedicated to learning and discovery, to finding out the factual truth of matters, then you can't be a good atheist. And the doors are towards the back. You can leave now. If you are not dedicated to the truth, I think I can confidently say you are not a good atheist. Now, you might be saying to yourself, though, and this is a reasonable objection, that it isn't a very good criterion because doesn't everyone seek the truth? Don't Christians say they value truth too? And they do say it, but they don't practice it, unfortunately. If it were true, all the major Christian denominations wouldn't have denial of the mechanisms of evolution as core parts of their doctrine. Now, I know right away some of you are thinking, wait a minute. What about the Catholic Church? They nominally accept that humans evolved over millions of years of time. You could also say the same for the Church of Latter-day Saints. So the old crazy and the new crazy are all working just fine with this. And you can find many other denominations in between that seem to have no problem with the superficialities of evolution. They're willing to say things happened over time. But note that what I said they had problems with was the mechanisms of evolution. As scientists, that's what we care about, was the process. How did it happen? Not the details of the day-to-day changes that occurred, but how those changes occurred. And we have a battery of well-supported, unambiguously factual mechanisms driving evolutionary change. And none of them, not one, involves fairies, aliens, angels, or gods. But the only process of evolution endorsed by any of these religious institutions is one of God-guided, directed, teleological change, a mechanism completely unsupported by any evidence, in direct contradiction to known processes, and propped up only by an irrational need to make their holy dogma relevant to human origins. They are all intelligent design creationists, in other words, and they are all wrong. Now, I left my liberal Lutheran church when I was 13 years old, and I learned that I was expected to believe in a lot of false ideas to be a member. This has been a lifelong value for me. How much of the facts and data and evidence are you willing to compromise? My answer is, and has always been, zero. Okay, another one. So truth, I think, is so essential to our identity, we have to embrace this. We do not believe in delusions. We try our best to shake them off. But here's one that some of you might argue with, and that is this value of autonomy. You see, for many years, atheists have been in the minority. I've walked and talked with so many people who thought for so long that they were the only one, the only person in their community who saw through the god-awful babble of the church. Of course, now that we have the internet, those same people are discovering that they are part of a global movement. What that means, though, is that many atheists, and I'm looking at all of you out there, many atheists are nonconformists, boat rockers, weirdos, and outcasts. I knew I would get that response because we like it that way. You see, we are not sheep. We love people who stand up for themselves. We detest people who try to impose rules on us. That's why I have to be very careful to keep my description of values general and to be clear that I'm not imposing them on you, but describing what I see emerging as a consensus. because otherwise you guys will march up here and pillory me after this talk. And I know, you guys, you're atheists, you're ruthless and pitiless. That's the way we are. But what it means is that we find common cause with the people who have also been oppressed by this racist, patriarchal culture we live in. People should be free to be who they are, and more, they should be free to stand up loud and proud and be that person with impunity. We will not live in a monoculture. We're going to find strength in diversity. I can think of no clearer example than a struggle that has riven the online atheist community for the last year or so, the effort to acknowledge the role of women in atheism. For years, the face of atheism has been white, male, and middle-aged. And as certain complacency had settled in, women by default had their role as wives or organizers, and we'd adopted a casually masculine expectation that all of our intellectual leaders would look like, well, okay, like this. Atheist meetings, for a long time, looked an awful lot like meetings of the Mormon leadership. Now that's changing. We're telling people to come out, join us, be free of this straitjacket of convention. And what's happening is the discovery that women have even more reason to be pissed off at religion than men. And they are a very fast-growing segment of our community. Some people resent that. I have experienced that quite a bit online as well. And I cannot and will not argue that being an atheist immediately makes you a rational person, or they'd all be feminists. But I can say for myself and the majority of atheists that we are all overjoyed. Our ranks are swelling with fierce, independent women who are changing us, making us stronger and louder, and standing up for their causes and making all of us fight for women's rights, reproductive freedom, and equality of opportunity. This is atheism too. If you are LGBT, if you want equality and social justice, you are atheism. If you're a member of a minority seeking recognition of your rights as a human being and respect in a society that you help shape, you are atheism too. In general, if you are a human being with real-world concerns, who wants to change the world, who wants to contribute in a unique way that encourages those diverse views, then you should be one of us. This club, the people we see here, this club is only closed to people who fuss about an imaginary afterlife, getting right with an imaginary God, conforming to an arbitrary dogma, and who think the most useless act of all, prayer, is a contribution that they deserve thanks for. So we have common causes. We have truth and justice as common causes. We sound like supermen and women, all working for truth, justice, and the Australian way. But what that makes us is it makes us part of a community, and community is that third really important value. There's this tired stereotype of atheists that's very current in conservative circles, and you'll probably recognize this. We're all these cranky curmudgeons, we're grim nihilists and loners. And some of us are. But for most of us, it is not true. When you're a social pariah, as so many atheists have been, is it any wonder that some of us might be a little bit lonely and bitter? As my colleague on Free Thought Blogs, Greta Christina, has been arguing, we also have good reason to be angry with a discriminatory society that does stupid things in the name of the Lord. But atheism is blossoming. Atheists are coming out everywhere, speaking up on the internet and public spaces, gathering together in meetings and discovering that we are not alone. And yes, it is good. We like each other. We work together. We are happy together. Now, 3 weeks ago, we had a wonderful meeting in Washington, D.C., the Reason Rally. Who was there? it's a long ways away from you guys, I know. Okay. We still had 20,000 people show up on the mall in Washington, D.C. And they gathered in utterly miserable weather. It was cold. It was raining all day long. I walked around the crowds, though, and you know what? Everyone was smiling. It was weird. Nobody was complaining, except for there was a collection of cranky protesters out on the fringe, like Fred Phelps's clan and things like that. They were very upset. But everyone in the atheist community was standing there with a big grin on their face. You know, I talked to some of the policemen who were monitoring the crowd. They were up there on horseback watching us, and they were smiling. It was such a good time. You know, if I were the Grinch that day, my heart would have grown 3 sizes. But I'm not a Grinch, so it's still tiny and shriveled. That's okay. Now, I was also privileged to be backstage with all the speakers and the celebrities and the leaders of atheist organizations, and they were all jubilant too. We were all standing there damp and soggy. I remember watching Tim Minchin doing his set. Yes, Tim Minchin, he's great. He's doing his set. He's barefoot as he always is. The stage is covered with water. It's soaking wet. And in among the water, there's all the cables snaking up to the speakers and amps for Bad Religion's set. You know, huge cables all over the place. And I was just thinking, you know, all we need is one short and the entire atheist movement could be decapitated today. But still, he had a grand time. We all had a grand time. Everyone had those big goofy smiles on their faces. And now this weekend, we meet 4,000 strong in Melbourne. And what an amazing crowd this is. How many of you are happy? See, we aren't grim and sour at all. This has been a great, great meeting where we've all been overjoyed and pleased and happy to meet each other. I've even had a hug-off here at the meeting. It was spectacular. Martin Pribble, I think he's still alive out there somewhere. Now, the thing is, this is not surprising. We are a social species and we thrive in communities. It's how we have survived and grown so far. And atheists, contrary to some of our critics, are really fully human. We're not aliens at all. And this willing cooperativity is something we have to value. Not only is it who we are, but it's how the good atheists of the 21st century will win in the end. You see, we humans are different from other species in this regard. I have a favorite story, a short little story I have to tell you from the primatologist Robert Sapolsky. Fabulous writer, you ought to look him up and read him. He's a primatologist who studies the endocrinology of baboons. And he made an observation that I think highlights the human situation because we are not baboons. And here's what he said. When baboons hunt together, they'd love to get as much meat as possible, but they're not very good at it. The baboon is a much more successful hunter when he hunts by himself than when he hunts in a group because they screw up every time they're in a group. Say 3 of them are running as fast as possible after a gazelle, and they're gaining on it, and they are deadly. But something goes on in one of their minds. And he says to himself, what am I doing here? I have no idea whatsoever, but I'm running as fast as possible, and this guy is running as fast as possible right behind me, and we had one hell of a fight a couple months ago. I don't know why we're running so fast right now, but I'd better just stop and slash him in the face before he gets to me. So the baboon suddenly stops and turns around, and they go rolling over each other like Keystone Cops, and the gazelle is long gone because the baboons are just become disinhibited. They get crazed around each other at every juncture. I think that's kind of cool. I'd like to see that. But that's not us. We aren't baboon-like at all. Even though baboons are really scary animals, they're stronger than us, individually fiercer, and they have those savage, huge fangs. If you've ever seen one yawn, it's scary. But they have this weakness, and we have this strength. We work together. You know that in the childhood of our species, we are prey to the predators of the African continent. Alone, we are soft, weak, and tasty, and I'm sure the lions and leopards enjoyed a hominid snack. But together, I'm sure that when some ferocious cat came upon a tribe of humans together, and when all those humans turned their 10 or 15 pairs of eyes on the predator and reached for stones and sharpened sticks, that cat felt fear and would slink away. Those eyes we have, those hunter's eyes on the front of our face, when a group of us turn those eyes in cold calculation on any problem, when our hands work together, we are the most powerful force on the planet. Now, yesterday, I was listening to our Christian protesters outside. Some of you were there. And I thought, so that's what you get when you give a sheep a microphone. You get amplified bleating. There they were, calling on everyone to deny the richness of human experience and join the flock in the narrow, bigoted, boring confines of the sheep pen, so mindless that they didn't even realize that they were calling out to the wolves. I have a different metaphor for us. So I have a different metaphor for us. My brothers and sisters in atheism, we are not sheep. There are no shepherds here on the stage. I look out from this stage, I see 4,000 pairs of hunters' eyes, 4,000 hunters' minds, 4,000 pairs of hunters' hands. I see the primeval primate hunting band grown large and strong. I see us so confident in our strength that we laugh at our enemies. I see a people thinking and planning, fierce and focused, learning and building new tools to conquer new worlds. You are not sheep. You are a fierce, coordinated hunting pack, men and women working together, and those other bastards have cause to fear us. So let's do it. Let's all just work together and make them tremble and demolish the city of God. Thank you.